I'm Laura Desmond, the curator and educator here at the Frederick Remington Art Museum. And I want to welcome you to this 8th installment of a 9-part webinar series exploring the life and career of American sculptor Sally James Farnham. The Remington Museum opened a new permanent exhibit dedicated to this important 20th century artist about a year ago now. And as usual, I want to give a special note of thanks to Michael Reed, the researcher behind the Catalog Raisonné project, who has been my chief source of information and archival materials through the process both of curating the Farnham exhibit and creating these webinars as well. So thank you to Michael Reed. And since we have such an intimate group today, I think you can feel free to just sort of shout out if you have a comment or question as we go along, rather than putting them in the chat box or saving them till the end. So today's webinar features Farnham's large-scale monuments and other works that are tied to specific locations. So it's going to be the first webinar that's, doesn't really correspond to a thematic area in the exhibition at the museum, though there is a section of the interactive kiosk in the exhibit that's dedicated to these site-specific works. Today's webinar also is going to leave out Farnham's numerous Pan-American works that are site-specific and that were discussed in webinar 7, which is available as a recording on the museum's website. So Farnham had been sculpting for only 2 years when she received her first significant commission for a large-scale sculpture. This one, the work she created, Bacchus Fountain, was ambitious, complex, and daring, depicting 3 life-size nude female figures dancing freely around a column on top of which a young boy is seated. Not only was the work a bold exploration of female freedom through dance, it also demonstrated Farnham's ability to design site-specific work on a grand scale. And that's going to be important because she would go on to create quite a number of large-scale site-specific works, which we'll be looking at today. And I would draw your attention to details in the work that contribute to its exuberant, joyous energy. Details like these goats that are sort of smiling along the base of the fountain, the fecund garlands that are festooned around the base and twine up the pillar that's in the midst of the sculpture. The choice to have 2 of the figures facing outward and 1 inward in this circle, which enhances the sense of movement in the piece. Farnham's subject is ostensibly classical, but the freedom and joy of her female figures are a modern expression. And I'll draw your attention to the writing that is at the bottom of this photograph, writing in Farnham's own hand. She wrote it beneath the photo that we just saw, but it was also inscribed on a plinth of the finished fountain. And it reads, "In Arcadia, blessed spot, sun's reproach and sun's culotte, graces of alluring shapes played and danced among the grapes, none to question nor to hamper, naught on joy to put a damper, joyous spontaneity, knowing no propriety. Shall a maiden stiffly bodiced stand the type of all that's modest? Or the consciousness of virtue be expressed by shoes that hurt you? Would the all-wise power saw fit to unlace our lives a bit, Give us room to breathe and be like the gods in Arcady. It's just a wonderful expression of this sort of female bodily freedom that we see reflected in the sculpture as well. Isaac Emerson, who had commissioned the sculpture for his Italian garden in 1904, moved his estate to Brooklandwood outside of Baltimore and recreated the garden, installing a pool around Farnham's fountain. Farnham's son, James, known as Jimmy, posed for the faun that is seated atop the central column of the Bacchus fountain, holding a bunch of Dionysian grapes in his upraised hand. It's a wonderful sort of double image here in the photo that you see was the pose that Farnham selected for the faun on the column. The fountain is sometimes referred to as the Bacchantes, who were the female followers of Dionysus, known in Rome as Bacchus, often portrayed as inspired by the god into a state of ecstatic frenzy through dance. It's unknown when Farnham created this model for a fountain, but it has a similar theme to her Bacchus fountain. And it's possible that it was an alternate design for that commission. So you see similarly these nude female figures, and they possibly have a little, they're a little more the classic conception of the Bacchantes or the Maenads. They seem a little more frenzied than the dancers that we see in the completed work, but it does seem like a similar concept. Here's a rear view of the same model.
I would say this shifts the importance from the spontaneity, joy of dancing to the satire sitting on the top.
Yeah, it puts more emphasis on that figure, and definitely I think that there's a little bit more of the orgastic sense that's sort of associated with the Maenads or the Bacchantes in this one. Just the way that the figures are a little more convoluted and contorted than we see in the completed piece. So students of Farnham's work, like yourselves, are likely to know that Ogdensburg, where Farnham grew up, was the site of her first major public commission and one of her most notable monuments. In the decades following the American Civil War, communities around the nation commissioned memorials that honored the dead and linked local volunteerism and sacrifice with ideals of civic pride and responsibility. And Ogdensburg was no exception, and the local Grand Army of the Republic, Ransom Post 54, organized a campaign for such a monument in Ogdensburg. Farnham submitted 2 design submissions, and of the 16 submissions, her Spirit of Liberty was selected, and it would be the first of several soldiers and sailors monuments that Farnham would create. The monument was dedicated on August 23rd, 1905. The Vice President of the United States, Charles W. Fairbanks, representing President Theodore Roosevelt, and General Newton M. Curtis of Ogdensburg, hero of Fort Fisher, were the keynote speakers. U.S. Senator George P. Malby of Ogdensburg presided as MC, and Mrs. Fairbanks, former President General of the DAR, was the guest of honor. There was a crowd of 20,000 people at the unveiling. The 23rd Regiment of Regulars marched from Sackett's Harbor to Ogdensburg, taking nearly a week to arrive. A revenue cutter was in the river, decorated with flags, and offered a 21-gun salute.
Wow.
So if a Civil War monument seems worlds away from a Bacchic dance, I'd note that the winged victory atop Farnham's Spirit of Liberty conveys graceful dignity and strength, even as she thrusts a voluptuous leg forward from her flowing drapery. Frederick Remington remarked of this figure, "I'm no judge of women's faces, but you've got a leg and a knee there that will make you famous." She really is pretty dishy, the victory that's atop this monument. You know, you look up to her and she's just got these gorgeous curves, and, you know, bits and pieces of her are revealed by the drapery. The monument held great personal significance for Farnham. Not only was Ogdensburg her hometown, but it was also the site from which her beloved father, Colonel Edward C. James, had led volunteers to serve in the Union Army. In a 1905 interview, Farnham said that she felt sure that no group of or single statue she may make in the future could mean more to her than the Ogdensburg Monument, because it appealed to her as the fulfillment of hopes and ambitions in which her father was vitally interested. "You see, we were always such good friends, real chums," she said with wistful sweetness. "And we understood each other so well that it delights me to have a work in which he was so interested stand in the place where he was known and loved." Farnham's design was innovative and elegant. Set atop a 35-foot column, a commanding winged victory, standard in hand, holds a laurel wreath outstretched in her hand, while a uniformed soldier set at the base guards the allegorical figure above. So the figure stood here in the original design on the base, which you might have seen in the earlier photos, but after repeated acts of vandalism, he was past the point where he could risk another act of vandalism by being returned to the base of the monument. So he was put in storage for his own safety until the opening of the Farnham exhibit here at the Remington Museum made a perfect opportunity for him to be placed on display and publicly available in the museum's lobby right across the street from the site of the monument, with nice interpretive materials in the back that situates him in relation to the monument across the street.
That's a very good choice of location of the soldier that otherwise would be hard to exhibit in the museum.
It's a really great location, and it's wonderful that it is, you know, anybody can walk in off the street. I think that ideally it would be nice to get some sort of interpretive material placed at the site of the monument, directing people across the street to the lobby of the museum so that they can see the soldier that goes with the monument that's in the park, you know, so get some sort of image of the original design of the monument, but also letting people know that they can come and see the soldier at any time.
Laura, this is Janet. Did the soldier require a lot of restoration when you dragged him up?
Yeah, the soldier did require a lot of conservation efforts, and the conservators basically said there's not enough of his bronze left to fix him again if he gets damaged this severely. I mean, he was yanked right off at the base, like it broke his legs. And that was after previous acts of vandalism, like where his gun was broken off. You know, there were other less damaging episodes, but that one where he was broken off at the legs was really severe. And so it would not have been a good idea to put him at risk again.
Right.
Here, Farnham poses with the model for her soldier, and in the background, you can make out the shield-shaped plaques that will be affixed to the base of the monument, as you see here, and, you know, making clear that it is in honor of the soldiers and sailors from the town of Oswegatchie who fought in the War of the Rebellion. And so this was some of Farnham's early bas-relief work as well. So she would go on to do a lot more bas-relief sculpture like this.
I should note that the deer
Mhm.
appears there, and it appears in the seal of the county. And in the county offices, there's a stained glass window done by Dick Ashley that features the representation that appears on the bas-relief there.
Oh, that is, I did not know about the stained glass. I did know that it was part of the seal of the county of St. Lawrence, but that is, I will have to check out the stained glass sometime.
Yes, go into the lobby of the county building and take a look.
Cool.
Laura, then is the upper, is that New York State, just because it's a little harder to see?
Yeah, I think that that's the New York State seal up there.
I also, since you talked about her connection to her dad and the city, I think that gives me more insight to the statement on the upper left-hand side, the dedication.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was not referred to as the Civil War, it's the War of Rebellion,
Right.
which calls a spade, I think.
Yep.
Which you don't usually see, on these monuments.
And it can be easy, I think, sometimes to think of sculptures of bald eagles as generic because we see eagles so often as the, sort of symbol of the United States. But Farnham, in fact, purchased a bald eagle and had it in her studio to model from for this work and another work that we'll also be seeing shortly. So, and then after she was done with the modeling, she gave the eagle to the Bronx Zoo. I should also mention that a version of this monument was erected in Bloomfield, New Jersey in 1912. Those who had commissioned this sculpture for Ogdensburg gave permission for it to be replicated outside of New York State. So it is in Bloomfield, New Jersey, and there the base reads, "A tribute to the dead, a memory for the living, an inspiration for posterity." And the program for the dedication ceremony of the Bloomfield Monument notes that, quote, "In the illustrated lectures on Greek art in Columbia College, this figure was shown as an ideal example of the best combination of modern ideals with Greek inspiration." Two other large Civil War monuments followed soon after, both in Rochester, New York. Here we see Defenders of the Flag, a soldiers and sailors monument situated in Mount Hope Cemetery in Rochester. The Chicago Journal Monumental News in 1908 listed Farnham among the top 7 women sculptors of heroic scale work. Later that year, she was asked to produce a complex multi-piece bas-relief frieze for the new Pan American Union building in Washington, D.C., which was featured in webinar 7 of this series. There's a revealing story surrounding the creation of Defenders of the Flag, the model for which you see here, which was commissioned in 1906, but not completed until 1908. In the spring of 1907, a member of the Rochester committee called to ask if Farnham could come to Rochester to review the site. Farnham declined, saying she was busy on other work and wouldn't be free for about 6 weeks. When they phoned again a couple of months later, asking if she'd completed the other project, she replied that the job was, quote, "satisfactorily accomplished, and it weighs about 10 pounds. I'm nursing him at present, and have my oldest boy to install in school and am moving into town for the winter. And I also have a few guests to entertain, but I think I can tackle your monument next week, end quote. Incidentally, I'm also just intrigued by this model for the monument featuring two male nudes without the uniforms they would wear in the finished monument. It strikes me that it might have been somewhat eyebrow raising for a woman to be sculpting life-size male nudes. In this February 17th, 1908 diary entry, Remington describes a visit to the Roman Bronze Works Foundry. Quote, saw my big horse set up in plaster. Sally Farnham came in. She has a splendid soldier monument there, also in plaster. Farnham here refers to his own work, The Cowboy, his only monumental sculpture, and Farnham's splendid soldier monument was her Defenders of the Flag. This 18-foot granite Celtic cross was set in the GAR Civil War soldiers' burial plot at Rochester's Holy Sepulchre Cemetery and dedicated on September 25th of 1908. Presumably, Farnham's intimacy with her eagle model contributed to her powerful bronze eagle surmounting the marble cross. And here's an image of the monument as you see today. And so it's when you see the images of the monument when it was erected in 1908, this fir tree that's now towering over the monument is a tiny little 3-foot high sapling that looks like it's just been planted near the sculpture, and now it looms over the monument. And this was used as a cover photo for the Sons of Union Veterans Civil War Abraham Lincoln Camp 6 in Rochester for their Facebook page. And the same group just this year had 2 meetings at 2 Farnham monuments in Rochester. They're meeting on St. Patrick's Day at the Celtic Cross Monument and on Memorial Day at Defenders of the Flag. So it really, I want to thank Michael Reed for bringing those posts to my attention, because they really help to demonstrate the ongoing relevance of Farnham soldiers and sailors monuments. Farnham's next soldiers and sailors monument is a World War I monument that was unveiled in Fultonville, New York in August of 1927. And it's called Like Hell You Can. An archival photo shows 2 friends of Farnham's son posing for the figures of the soldier and sailor. Before its unveiling in Fultonville, the monument was displayed in New York's Central Park, where it received national attention. The press photo that you see on the left of celebrity veterans visiting the monument gives a sense of the publicity to which Farnham's works were subject. The monument drew criticism from some circles as being jingoistic. The figures were interpreted as aggressive. Farnham certainly modeled figures here that could be described as defiant in their firm and upraised chins, the upward tilt of the soldier's helmet, and the sailor's pistol at the ready. Farnham herself said of this work, "I'm so happy to be able to make it a simple memorial and not a sculpture of good little Sunday school boys or soldiers and sailors dying." And lastly, in the soldiers and sailors category, we have these photos of a model for a a work that was never executed. It's unknown for what competition Farnham created what seems to be a model for a soldiers and sailors monument, but it was never cast. There's no foundry records associated with it either. Since her first known designs in the genre of funerary monuments were grave markers for military figures, it may be that Farnham's early work creating soldiers and sailors monuments led to her initial forays into funerary monuments, which are the next category of works that I'll introduce. She would go on to create a diverse range of funerary monuments, including equestrian bas-reliefs, intimate figurative works, and Renaissance revival style works, among others. She created this model for a memorial to Mexican-American and Civil War officer Major General Philip Kearny, who was reinterred at Arlington National Cemetery in 1911. But a design by sculptor Edward Clark Potter was selected for the site instead. Farnham's entry into a 1914 competition to erect a more fitting monument at the grave of 10th US President John Tyler was drawn by her cousin, Charles S. Chapman. But a design by Raymond Averill Porter was selected for that site. So I'm sharing a bunch of works that weren't winners in the competitions, but which give a sense of Farnham's concepts and evolution as a designer of monumental and site-specific works. Farnham was commissioned to create this bas-relief for the grave of Lieutenant General Adna Chaffee, who took part in the American Civil War and the so-called Indian Wars and played a key role in the Spanish-American War. He was the Chief of Staff of the United States Army from 1904 to 1906. The grave marker was placed at Arlington National Cemetery, but was later removed by a family member in the 1940s, and the fate of Farnham's work is unknown. Farnham's model for the Emma Dick Biardot Memorial from 1921 is pictured here. Emma Dick had a noted career as an opera singer before her marriage to Franco-American Food Company co-founder Ernest Biardot. And the grave marker was executed in marble by Farnham's sometimes collaborator, Robert A. Bailey of Gloucester, New Jersey. In 1922, Farnham's friend Irene Castle commissioned her to enlarge her 1915 studio work, The End of the Day, in marble for her husband's grave in Woodlawn Cemetery, Bronx, New York. This work too was carved in marble by Robert A. Bailey. By the early 1950s, the original marble had become discolored, so Castle had this bronze replacement cast. The original marble is in the collection of Brook Green Gardens in Murrells Inlet, South Carolina. Catherine Briss Fauner's daughter, Evelyn Hubble, who commissioned this work, directed Irene Castle's dance school, and family history suggests that Irene Castle, who was a close friend of Farnham, posed for this work. The stone was subsequently resold to the Orto family. As a memorial to his wife, Florence Brokaw Martin Satterwhite, prominent Dr. Preston Pope Satterwhite hired architect Horace Trumbauer to design this Greek temple to protect an allegorical figure of the goddess Flora designed by Farnham. Trumbauer based his design on the Temple of Love created by Richard Meek for Marie Antoinette at the Palace of Versailles, which of course was in turn based upon the 1st century BCE Roman temple of Vesta at Tivoli. Satterwhite incidentally lived in Great Neck, where Farnham had lived for a number of years with her then husband, Paulding Farnham. Florence Brokaw Martin Satterwhite was a cousin to Irving Brokaw, whose wife, Lucille Nave Brokaw, Farnham had sculpted previously. Flora's temple is inscribed, "Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace." While Florence Brokaw Martin Satterwhite died at age 61, Farnham's Flora, with her flowing drapery, handful of flowers, and graceful stride, embodies eternal youth and beauty. The unknown work on the right, photographed in Farnham's studio, may have been a variant on the figure of Flora. Plaques are another category of works tied to specific locations, which Farnham was commissioned to create. While some of Farnham's plaques have been discussed in previous installments of this webinar series, such as her bas-relief portraits and her many Pan-American plaques, ranging from the massive frieze of the discoverers in Washington, D.C., to the many commemorative plaques celebrating and honoring historic figures from Central and South America, several more do not fall into that category. On the left side of the screen, you see Farnham's Josiah Bartlett plaque, commissioned by the Mary Bartlett chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution, which had donated an elevator to the organization's new headquarters in Washington, D.C. Farnham's charge was to create a plaque honoring Josiah Bartlett, a signer of the Declaration of Independence and former governor of New Hampshire. It was placed beside the elevator and was, at the time, the first work by a woman artist and the first by a DAR member in DAR headquarters in DC. If any of you are watchers of the TV series The West Wing, this plaque made an appearance in an episode. Watchers may recall that the fictional US president in the series is Josiah Bartlett. And the plaque on the right for the Princess Theater in New York is not verified as a Farnham work, but the image was found in the McMahon Family Archive and is in keeping with what Farnham was producing at the time of the theater's opening in New York City in 1913. The theater was torn down in 1955 and the location of the plaque is unknown. In 1931, Farnham created a set of plaques for her friend, the celebrated dancer Irene Castle. After a devastating fire at Castle's animal shelter, Orphans of the Storm, in Deerfield, Illinois, likely the result of arson by those opposed to the nascent animal rights movement, Farnham created these bronze tablets to commemorate lives of the animals lost during the fire and to encourage donations. Originally placed on either side of the front door, the plaques are now in storage. The last category of cited works to explore is a number of commemorative works designed by Farnham, which functioned not as grave markers, but rather to remember and honor important historic figures. In 1911, Farnham was the only woman invited by the Secretary of War to submit a design for a monument to Revolutionary War General Nathaniel Greene, and the archival images suggest she was working with at least two different design concepts. One, the one that you see in the upper right here, on a formal granite base, and the other, which you see here, on natural stone outcrop. But sculptor Francis Herman Packard won the commission. It looks like Farnham didn't even make the top three, according to the report that was issued by the commission. In 1914 to 15, Farnham was approached regarding a Silverton, Ohio memorial, possibly a fountain, in honor of her friend, political cartoonist and fellow horse enthusiast, Homer Davenport. Unfortunately, contributions soon dwindled with the onset of World War I, and after the war, Farnham's more elaborate memorial was not constructed, a marble marker featuring one of Davenport's cartoons being erected instead. It's a lovely little piece, though. I mean, you get not just the tablet and pencil, but this charming little dog resting its muzzle on Davenport's knee. In 1914, a movement was underway to reconfigure and improve Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia, and the new design was to center on a bronze monument dedicated to its namesake, David Rittenhouse, the colonial American astronomer, scientist, and revolutionary. Farnham's design was considered ingenious in deploying the walking stick on which Rittenhouse leans as a gnomon for a sundial, a unique tribute to the astronomer. This 1921 photo of Farnham at work on her model of David Rittenhouse shows a slightly altered figure, perhaps in response to a letter from a review committee member who disliked the, quote, smug self-complacency, end quote, on the face of the original design. A letter in the McMahon Family Archive from either a project committee member or perhaps the funder of the project indicates that Farnham's was the preferred design for the project, and newspapers reported that Farnham won the commission. But the onset of World War I seems to have initially delayed the project, and after the funder passed away in 1922, the commission was not completed. Although I said I was leaving out Farnham's many site-specific Pan-American works, I'd be remiss if a webinar on Farnham's monuments didn't at least mention Farnham's most famous work, her 1921 Simon Bolivar, located in Bolivar Plaza at the head of the Avenue of the Americas in New York City. At the time of its creation, it was the largest equestrian sculpture and the only male equestrian monument created by a woman artist. You can learn much more about the Bolivar Monument and Farnham's other Pan-American sculptures by watching part 7 of this webinar series dedicated to Farnham's Pan-American works. Records show that in 1923, Farnham was asked to create a tribute to William Mulholland, the civil engineer whose infrastructure supplied water to Los Angeles. The work was never completed after a project dam collapsed, killing hundreds. In August 1923, Farnham signed a contract with the San Fernando Mission in Mission Hills, Los Angeles, to model and furnish a statue of 18th century missionary Father Junipero Serra. The Franciscan priest founded 21 missions along the California coast and was canonized in 2015. In an October 1930 interview, Farnham directs the interviewer, E.A. Walmsley, who admires the work, quote, "See where the monk's hood falls back from his head? I made it that way so the birds could build their nests in it. I know they'd like to." When the monument was dedicated in November of 1925, a crowd of thousands watched a pageant recreating the founding of the San Fernando Mission, and planes flew overhead, dropping flower petals on the scene. Farnham's Junipero Serra monument, like other Serra monuments, has been the object of criticism by Indigenous and other activists who see Serra as a symbol of Catholic oppression of Indigenous people. Farnham's sculpture was removed by the city of Los Angeles on June 3rd of 2020. Little's known about this work other than that the photo is dated to February 1932 and marked Memorial to Reichardt. A Mrs. Reichardt enters into the Farnham record in only the most shadowy way, as having been married to a Cincinnati millionaire who left her for a younger woman, or possibly as mistress to Homer Davenport. But why an aviator memorial? It's really unclear. A similar aviator monument by the sculptor Augustus Lukeman was dedicated at the Lindsley School in Wheeling, West Virginia. And that one was dedicated on Armistice Day in 1925. So similar to the dating of this photo a little earlier. But it's in honor of Lewis Bennett Jr., who left Yale, like Farnham's son James, to volunteer to fly in World War I. And finally, a fascinating work about which we know nothing. We've got this model for an elaborate fountain, which seems to have a Viking theme, maybe, or a Germanic theme, possibly. Here's another shot of what seems to be the central figure up here on the top part of the fountain, right? So we get the detail of that part of the model here. And it strikes me as having a kind of Rheingold sort of theme to it, you know, with these maidens sort of swooping up out of the waters, and then this armored figure with a winged helmet and a horn in hand surmounting the rivers. But other than, you know, noting that it has like a Viking or Germanic theme, we don't know anything else about it, what it might have been commissioned for, but quite fascinating.
I thought it was a mixture of the Wagnerian opera cycle and the Trevi Fountain in Rome.
Yeah, I definitely saw the sort of you know, Rheingold or you know, the Wagnerian, but the Wagnerian sort of connection seems a little strange given Farnham's own patriotism and what would have been an anti-Germanic, I think, sentiment in the US in the years in which she was active. So, you know, that it strikes me as a little strange, just given that fact, but maybe art surmounts such political considerations.
Well, I think she had the opportunity to explore the female form again.
Yeah.
She did that so well. I noticed, by the way, in a lot of the photographs of her taken, not a lot, but a number of the photographs of her, she had one of her knees out like the Winged Victory person.
Oh.
When you go back through this sometime, take a look.
I will take a look. So I am, as always, happy to hear comments, try to answer questions. I will, you know, I'm just noting here on this slide that we have one more of these webinars left, which will look at Farnham's studio works and other works that aren't tied to a particular site. I mean, it won't be looking at her portraits because we explored that in depth in a previous episode, but all kinds of other works that are not site-specific works will be explored in the next one. So yeah, are there particular pieces that you want to go back to or questions I might be able to answer?
Well, I have one question. How this particular one in the slide before that showed the design for the whole thing, how big was that actual piece of physical representation that we see in the pictures? Like,
so this one we don't know specifically just because it doesn't appear in any of the studio shots, but ones that show up in studio shots are often about, you know, like 1.5 feet wide. I would say, maybe up to 2 feet.
And the other comment I want to make is the more I am able to attend your presentations, the more excited I am and profoundly interested in this person
Mhm.
because of her work and just her position in life at the time, and how she seems to be way ahead of her time as far as women participating in the arts and in public life.
Well, she moved in those circles, I mean, I think that you're right overall when we're thinking about American society, but the people with whom she was spending her time were also sort of at the cutting edge of the arts and other fields. I mean, I think that you were part of the webinar that, sort of dived into her participation in the Algonquin Roundtable, for example. So those were people who were very unconventional in a number of respects, but also doing great work in so many areas of the arts, from music to dance to writing.
Laura, this is Janet. And I have a comment on that aspect of Sally's life and the sort of the woman, the woman in society, the mother, the artist, and all the things that she was really good at and involved in. George was really wanted very much to be able to complete a biography and kind of expose the woman behind all of the sculptures. She seems to have been a really lively, funny, and vibrant woman with a really, it would have been a fascinating story, and he would have loved to do it. And Michael, of course, did some of it, but George was more interested, I think, in getting into the woman rather than the art. So I'm sorry we didn't get to do that, but we did learn, some interesting things and had some fabulous experiences. One of my other thing is a question that I seem to remember, and I don't think I saw it today. And I think this was a sculpture that was actually executed, one of the war memorials, which was referred to as The Soldier and the Bugle Boy.
Yes.
Is that up somewhere? Did we see that?
We did see that. I'm going back to it.
I remember the Bugle Boy being smaller than in the one that whatever I remember seeing.
It's this one, Defenders of the Flag. So here's the Bugle Boy.
Yeah.
And the soldier.
He was big. He's bigger than I remembered. You sort of had the feeling of more of the pathos, because here's this young boy who's probably going to go out and get shot, and she sort of captured some of that pathos, I think. And there's the soldier looking rather downcast. They're not heroic figures at all. They're human beings who are going out to be possibly slaughtered, which I thought was an interesting way to portray them.
I agree. I think that the posture of this soldier here is really powerful, is really poignant. It's those tiny details getting just the right body language that she excels at, that makes that figure really, really powerful. And the facial expression on the Bugle Boy, is one that is very direct, but also, I think,
so that is at Mount Hope. I guess we must have seen it. For some reason I felt like the boy was smaller, but I see now. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Laura.
Yeah.
Laura, for these public monuments, she's doing a lot of submissions. Do you have a sense of how many a a year or over her span of time, how many submissions she was sending? Because for the number that she's submitting, it's a lot of work to then, whether or not she's selected.
Right. It is. And it seems like, in the aughts and the teens and the 20s, she's doing quite a lot, and it really slows down after that. But I think particularly, I think that she would have been quite driven in the aughts to be making a name for herself, and submitting things for every possible commission. For many of these commissions, you have to be invited. Some
Right.
are open, some are by invitation only. But it seems like, right through those 3 decades, she took a lot of opportunities, and, it's hard to know, we have some of these images of of designs for competitions that she didn't win, that give us a great sense of like, oh, there was so much more she was doing, but we really don't know if there were even more, than that. And it does seem like there are these pockets of intense activity, in this period where she's working on the Ogdensburg Monument and these 2 Rochester monuments, sort of all at the same time. I mean, the Ogdensburg one is wrapped up, I think, largely before she's starting work on the construction of the Rochester monuments. But, I think she was already submitting the designs before she had completed the Ogdensburg monument. It's impressive. But I guess that's kind of how it has to be, right? You have to get your stuff out there, but there could be an, oh no, if like you're successful in a whole bunch at the same time, right? You don't want to have nothing to do, but then it probably must be quite a lot to take on several at the same time. But the is, from that respect, that so many of these commissions drag on and on and on. I mean, that's the flip side of it, is that a sculptor might be like ready to get this thing done, and it's taking years for the project commission to, agree on everything and finalize the funding. So it works that way too, I think.
And then I think you kind of said it, when her sculptures then became done in marble. So those aren't being cast. Is she normally working with the same marble artist?
Yeah, she worked a lot with Robert Bailey. I think, I'm not really sure about the Celtic cross that's here in Rochester, because we have this other name, we have a couple of other names associated with the marble part of this monument. So I don't think Bailey did this one. And it doesn't really seem like the work that he did for her. But for those that were human figures, it seems like she really worked with Bailey.
Yeah, I would feel like they'd need that close relationship to see her vision come to light in a marble statue, because it definitely is a different process. And so since she is not the one sculpting the marble herself, that I feel like she has to put a lot of trust into the person who's doing it. Whereas, as you say, this one could have been the local person who she's then working with to add the eagle to it.
Right. Yeah, we've got Massachusetts Monumental Company is a name that's associated with this one. So
yeah.
Any other questions or comments before we sign off?
Thanks again, Laura.
Oh, well, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you next month.
Okay, probably.
Last
clear.
one, bring your friends.
Yes.
God willing, and the creek don't rise.
Right. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.